The year was 1892, and in the Missouri Ozarks, the air itself seemed restless, as though the mountains were holding their breath. Black Hollow lay hidden between ridges that caught storms like bowls, a place where fog moved like spirits over the cedar tops and the soil carried the taste of iron. On one raw March morning, the miners' hammers struck the flank of the hill, and the echoes rang out too long, like bells tolling for the living. They said the hollow had never been truly quiet since. You want to know why the locals still cross themselves when they drive past Black Hollow? Why mothers whisper warnings about the witch who lived there, and why old-timers claim the earth itself remembers her name? Stay with me. And before we sink deeper into this cursed history, hit that subscribe button, give this story a like, and make sure you don't miss the next chapter of America's most unsettling forgotten legends. The Hollow was never meant for men. For generations, only hunters and a few desperate families dared its thickets, where the crows outnumbered the deer and the springs bubbled with a mineral tang that stained every rock red. But silver had been found a few valleys away, and silver was enough to make any man deaf to omens. By early 1892, a crew of 20 had pitched canvas tents by the creek, driving picks into the flank of Black Hollow Ridge. They worked with the blunt optimism of men who believed the mountain was just another wall to be broken. Watching them from above, in a crooked cabin clinging to the slope, lived Elin Hatchard. Widow, midwife, herbalist. She was not a recluse exactly, but she was not welcome either. Folks said she could coax milk back into a cow gone dry, or cure fever with a tea of boneset and willow, but they also said she could sour butter from 50 yards if you crossed her. Her hair, dark as pine pitch, had long gone gray at the edges, and her hands were always stained from roots she gathered in the low moonlight. Children stared when she passed through town with her woven basket. Men spat. Women crossed themselves but kept her remedies tucked in their cupboards. Elin never asked for company. Her house smelled of sage smoke and rain-rotted wood, the shelves lined with jars where roots curled like sleeping snakes. She lived close to the ground, listening to the language of springs and winds. She had buried a child in that soil once, a little girl who never reached her first winter. After that, she told no one her prayers aloud. On the third week of blasting, something happened. A mule belonging to Foreman Bram Haskett drank from the creek and fell stiff within an hour, foam flecking its muzzle. The men muttered it was poisoned water. By dawn, 2 more animals had sickened, their eyes turned white. The miners spat the same name on their lips, the Witch of the Hollow. Sheriff Aspen Riggs rode up that same day, a broad man with a brass star pinned heavy on his vest, and knocked on Ellen's crooked door. He carried himself like one who had no doubts. "You see what's happened down there?" he asked. Ellen stood in the doorway, a sprig of cedar pinned above it, her face calm but lined from years of weather. "The creek is older than your blasting, Sheriff. The earth gives what it wants to give." Riggs leaned close. "Earth don't kill mules, woman. Spells do. And I'll not have you cursing good men's work." She said nothing, only turned her head slightly, as though listening to something deeper than his voice. Riggs left angry, and the miners left more certain than ever that the widow had hexed them. That night, someone left a bundle of bird bones strung on a red thread nailed to Ellen's cabin door. A warning, or a curse returned. She took it down without a word, burned it in her fire, and let the smoke out slow. By April, whispers thickened. Hens stopped laying in 3 farms down the road. A miner's child woke screaming from night terrors. The men spoke of a sound in the shaft like the mountain groaning under their picks. Dry thunder, they called it, a hollow roar with no lightning, only dust that fell in trickles from the ceiling beams. Ellen, meanwhile, walked the hollow as if measuring something unseen. She gathered herbs by moonlight, planted corn by hand in a narrow strip of earth beside her cabin, and left jars of salve at the doors of women who had recently birthed. None thanked her. Some found the jars smashed by morning, as if the ground itself had spat them back. Then came the day Bram Haskett himself staggered into town, his face pale, saying he had seen her up on the ridge at dawn, arms raised, whispering to the fog while the timbers groaned below. His words spread faster than the fever. By dusk, the church bell called a meeting, and every man with a stake in the mine gathered. The pastor spoke of Jezebel. The sheriff spoke of order. And the men spoke of loss, of ruined animals and ruined chances at fortune. Only one voice spoke against them, a young mother whose child Elin had delivered in a snowstorm. She said the widow was no witch, only a healer. But her voice broke in the face of 20 men's rage. The meeting ended with a decision: Elin Hatchard would be spoken to proper. That night, as rain hammered the tin roofs, footsteps circled her cabin. A nail was driven into her doorframe, deep and crooked, a rusty iron spike. The symbol was clear: they meant to pin her spirit, to bind her. Elin sat by her hearth, staring at the iron, and whispered a single line into the smoke. You drive your nails into wood, but I hear the mountain. And it remembers. The spring turned to summer heavy with heat, the kind that lay over the Ozark ridges like a wet wool blanket. Black Hollow steamed after every storm, and the air carried the sour tang of blasting powder. By June, the miners had carved a wound into the hillside, a shaft framed with timbers, black mouths yawning where once only dogwood and cedar stood. Smoke from their campfires rolled up the slope at night, painting the stars with haze. The men worked harder, angrier, and with every swing of the pick they cursed the name of the woman above them. They called her hag, crone, witch, never Elin, never her name. They swore she watched from the ridge with eyes that gleamed like coals. Some spat tobacco in the dirt and said it kept her hex away. It was in late May when the first dry thunder shook the hollow again. A dull, guttural boom rolled under the shaft floor, rattling lanterns and making the timbers groan. The foreman said it was nothing but settling stone. But 2 days later, a roof beam cracked and dropped, grazing a man's shoulder and nearly pinning him. He swore he had heard a whisper just before it fell, a woman's voice saying, "Not here." The miners went back to work, but the hollow had started to turn against them. Wells on the lower farms soured overnight, their water turning metallic, stinging tongues and stomachs. A baby in town stopped breathing one midnight, his mother screaming for help. It was Elin who came, walking through the storm with a bundle of herbs and hot stones, kneeling at the child's side. She pressed her hand to his chest, breathed with him, coaxed him back until his first cry split the night again. The family wept with relief, then looked at her as though she had stolen breath rather than given it. "Mark my words," muttered Deacon Lowe the next morning. "She's the one who stilled him in the first place. A trick, curse and cure in the same hand." That idea spread like kindling catching fire. To the townsfolk, every ill fortune now bore her shadow. A wagon wheel that shattered on the road, a cow that dropped dead with milk still in her, a lightning strike that burned a shed. Each was whispered back to Elin. The sheriff, Aspen Riggs, was no longer patient. He had lost his own nephew in a cave-in near the shaft, a boy crushed by falling stone. Riggs rode hard to Elin's cabin one evening, the sun bleeding red behind him, and dismounted without a word. He hammered the butt of his rifle against her door until it shook. When she opened, he pushed inside. "I warned you. I told you to leave this hollow." Elin stood in the smoke of her hearth, her face unreadable. "The mountain is older than your badge, Sheriff. You think it bends to your law." Riggs slammed his fist against her table, rattling jars and spilling dried roots across the floor. "You listen to me, woman. These men have families to feed. They've sunk coin and blood into that shaft, and you'll not curse them out of their due." She bent slowly, gathering the scattered roots, her voice calm. "I curse no one. But you cut where the stone has veins. You bleed what should not be bled. Enough of your riddles." He grabbed her wrist, hard, then let go as though burned. "You're done here. You'll answer to the people." That week, a petition passed through town. Lined paper, ink blots, scrawled signatures. Some signed with trembling hands, some with bold flourishes, but nearly every name went down. The pastor urged it from the pulpit. The storekeeper slid it across his counter with each purchase. Mothers signed between washing linens. Even those who owed Elin their lives or children signed, some with shame, some with relief. By July, the list carried over 30 names. The petition demanded a hearing, not in court, but in the old barn by the crossroads, where corn once dried on rafters. A people's session, they called it. Justice of the kind that didn't wait for judges. The night before, thunderheads gathered but never broke, leaving the air thick and restless. Elin sat in her cabin alone, grinding herbs by lamplight. She could hear the miners below, their laughter sharp as knives, their curses drifting up with the smoke. On her doorframe, the rusty iron nail still jutted like a wound. She touched it once, then let her hand fall. Morning brought no storm, only a sun that baked the ground hard as brick. The barn filled with men before noon, their voices a rising swarm. Riggs stood at the front, the petition folded in his fist. "Neighbors," he began, "we've had enough sickness, enough death, enough blight. It points to one roof, one name." He turned, jabbing a finger at Elin, who stood in the doorway, shawl drawn, silent. The crowd murmured, surged, then hushed as the pastor raised his Bible. "If she be true, let her answer. If she be false, let the Lord show his sign." Elin stepped forward, her eyes sweeping the faces she had known for years. Faces she had stitched wounds for, birthed children for, buried kin for. Her voice was low but carried. "You cut the mountain. You poison your own wells. You break covenant with the earth and blame me. If I must stand here, I will speak plain. What you take will answer you." Shouts rose, fists banged on beams, and the pastor cried for silence. Riggs slammed his hand against the petition again. "Enough. The people will judge." The barn shook with voices, some calling for banishment, some for worse. Outside, the air grew heavy, and in the distance, the hollow gave a low, rolling groan, like thunder trapped underground. The people fell silent for a heartbeat, eyes wide. Then someone spat, "Devil's trick." Another shouted, "Sign from the Lord." The noise swelled again, louder than before. By sundown, the decision was made. Elin would not be left in peace. She would face them proper, and if the Lord willed, her fate would be sealed by their hands. That night, she returned to her cabin. The woods were alive with cicadas, their droning like 1,000 whispers. On her table lay the cedar sprig she always kept above her door, now withered and brown. She burned it in silence, the smoke rising thin against the rafters. The barn smelled of sweat, timber dust, and the iron tang of kerosene lanterns. By mid-July 1892, the air itself felt hostile, thick with anger and judgment. The people of the Ozarks had gathered, not for harvest or prayer, but for the spectacle of a trial that carried no judge, only fury. The petition lay nailed to a post at the front, black ink bleeding through thin paper like veins. Sheriff Aspen Riggs stood beside it, his face flushed with heat and rage. The pastor clutched his Bible as though it were a weapon. Behind them, the miners filled benches and rafters, boots muddy, fists restless. Women pressed at the back, whispering through shawls, some clutching infants, others clutching each other. And at the center, silent but unbending, stood Elin Hatchard. She wore no finery, only her faded dress, the hem stiff with mud, and a shawl that smelled of cedar smoke. Her hands were folded, calm, though her eyes burned like stormlight. "Neighbors," Riggs began, his voice booming off the rafters, "we are gathered to root out the sickness that's cursed this hollow. Livestock dead, wells turned foul, a boy crushed in the shaft, and all of it tied to one woman who walks with shadows." Murmurs rose, nods rippled through the barn. The pastor lifted his Bible. "The good book tells us, suffer not a witch to live. But let her answer, that the truth may be weighed before the Lord." He turned to Elin. "Woman, how plead you?" Her voice came steady, low, but it carried. "I have done no harm. I heal where I can. I bury where I must. It is the mountain that groans, not me. You cut veins in stone and wonder why blood runs." A miner spat. "She curses with riddles." Another shouted, "Test her. Make her prove she ain't hexed us." The pastor raised his hand, and silence fell heavy, brittle. "Let there be a sign." As if on cue, a gust rattled the barn boards. A lantern swayed, its flame licking wild. For a breath, All eyes locked on the glass. Then it toppled, shattering on the floor. Fire spread in a heartbeat, licking across spilled straw. Panic erupted. Men cursed, women screamed, children wailed. Smoke surged upward, black and choking. In the chaos, it was Elin who moved first, pulling a child from the floor where beams rained dust, pushing him into his mother's arms. Her shawl caught a spark, smoldered, but she tore it off without a cry. Yet her act of rescue did nothing to shift hearts. When the smoke cleared and the fire was beaten down with buckets, the people's fear had hardened into hatred. "See how she brings fire with her very breath," one man cried. Riggs' jaw tightened. "No more. Tonight it ends." They seized her by the arms, rough hands binding her wrists with rope. She did not struggle. She did not cry. Only once did she lift her head, eyes locking on Riggs. "You'll carry this," she said quietly. "Not just you. Your sons, and theirs." The sheriff flinched but barked the order. "Take her." They dragged her from the barn into the sweltering night. The moon hung thin and sharp above the ridge, a silver blade. They did not lead her to the gallows. There were none. Instead, they hauled her by wagon to the edge of the shaft itself, where the mountain's wound gaped black and hungry. The miners formed a circle, lanterns casting broken halos. The rope bit into her wrists, coarse and bloody. Riggs read no charges, offered no prayer. "You've cursed us long enough. Speak your last, and be done." Elin did not bow her head. She pressed her bound hands into the dirt, fingers clawing until soil smeared her palms. Then she whispered words no one understood fully, but all felt. "Stone, remember. Water, answer. Roots, bind their names. Let what they have broken never heal." The ground itself seemed to shiver. A rumble rose deep within the hollow, not thunder from the sky, but thunder from beneath, dry thunder, rolling like drums under the earth. The men stepped back, fear flickering in their eyes. But Riggs shouted over the roar. "Cast her in." 2 miners hauled her toward the edge. But before they could force her, the mountain answered. The shaft timbers cracked, groaned, and with a sound like a scream, the earth caved. Lanterns swung wild, spilling light on collapsing stone. 2 men vanished in a blur of dust and cries. Chaos erupted. Men scattered, coughing, shouting, clawing for air. When the dust cleared, the shaft lay half-collapsed, black as a grave. Elin was gone. No body, no cry, no fall. Only the print of her hand remained on the lip of the earth, pressed deep into wet clay, a triangle of fingers splayed wide, as though the mountain itself had taken her hand and kept it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even Riggs' voice faltered. Then someone muttered, "She's gone into the stone." Another whispered, trembling, "No. She is the stone now." The circle broke, men fleeing into the night, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the dark. By dawn, Black Hollow Ridge was silent, the shaft sealed by its own collapse. But the handprint remained, dark and damp, a scar that would not dry. The people told themselves it was over, that the witch was gone, that the mountain had swallowed her and her curse both. But the hollow did not forget. And before the summer ended, it would remind them. The summer of 1892 ended in silence. The mine lay abandoned, its timbers splintered, its shaft sealed by rock and fear. For a time, the people of the Ozarks tried to tell themselves it was done. That Elin Hatchard had been swallowed by the mountain, and with her, the curse. But the hollow remembered. The first sign came in the spring of 1893. Rain fell heavy, filling the creek until it frothed red as rust. Fields near the ridge sprouted stunted corn, their stalks curling inward as though strangled by unseen hands. Families moved away one by one, wagons creaking under quilts and children. Those who stayed whispered of shapes moving on the ridge at dusk, a woman's figure, shawl trailing, vanishing into cedar thickets. By 1895, the mine company had collapsed. Investors lost coin, Foreman Bram Haskett drifted west, and the hollow grew wilder, the road to it swallowed by weeds. But the sheriff could not leave so easily. Aspen Riggs buried his dead nephew on the church hill, then carried the weight of that night like a millstone. His cattle sickened each spring, coughing blood. His eldest boy wasted away with fever that came and went with the rains. By 1901, Riggs' beard was white, his back bent, his voice a rasp. When he died, they said he muttered in his last breath, "Her hand, still on me." The years moved. The hollow waited. In 1905, a lumber outfit cut into the ridge. Men with saws and mules camped by the old shaft, laughing at the superstitions of farmers. But after 3 weeks, their saws jammed with no cause, blades snapping teeth, and one man toppled from a felled oak into the very print of Elin's hand. His skull split on the clay, blood soaking into the same shape. By morning, the crew was gone, leaving behind half-cut logs like broken bones. The story passed into rumor. In 1918, when influenza swept the Ozarks, it struck unevenly. Houses on the ridges beyond Black Hollow buried whole families, but others were spared. What chilled the people most was the pattern. Every home tied by blood or oath to that barn meeting in 1892 lost someone. Names from the petition faded from church pews, replaced by empty seats. "She chooses," whispered the women as they boiled rags for fever. The handprint remained. After each storm, no matter how the earth washed, it darkened fresh, slick with moisture though the ground around was dry. Children dared each other to touch it. Some came back pale, clutching their bellies, vomiting bile by dawn. By 1934, the Works Progress Administration sent folklorists into the Ozarks to gather songs and tales. One young man, lean and earnest, sat in the parlor of a widow who had been a girl in that barn. She told him of the fire, of the ropes, of Elin's last words. Her hands trembled as she showed him a medal on a string, a child's trinket Elin had once given her for good luck. "I was the only one she saved in that fire," the widow whispered. "I held the petition in my hands. I signed. God forgive me." The folklorist wrote every word, then pressed her for proof of the sheriff's part. She hesitated, then gave him a bundle of letters she had hidden for 40 years. Aspen Riggs' own words, confessing doubt, confessing fear that they had condemned an innocent woman. She begged the young man not to publish them. He promised nothing. That night, the letters vanished from his satchel. He left the Ozarks the next morning, pale and shaken, refusing to say why. In 1937, a flood tore through the hollow, uprooting trees and stripping soil. When the waters receded, the handprint lay revealed again, sharper than before, its edges cut deep into the clay like a brand. Old folks crossed themselves. Younger ones laughed it off. But no one stepped inside its outline. Decades had passed, yet the story refused to die. Mothers still warned their children, "Don't go near the hollow, don't drink its water, don't mock its silence." And every so often, a traveler wandering too close would swear they heard a woman's whisper in the cedar thickets. Not a scream, not a threat, only a reminder. "You broke the covenant." And the hollow remembers. The years buried Black Hollow under moss and silence, but silence does not mean peace. By the 21st century, the ridge had become a curiosity, a name on faded maps, a place locals avoided but tourists whispered about. Developers saw what locals feared, opportunity. A heritage park, with boardwalks over the hollow, lights for night tours, brochures about Ozark legends. Miles Riggs arrived in a rented pickup one September morning, the fog still heavy in the cedars. He was no sheriff, no farmer, just a project manager with pressed jeans and an eager smile. But blood remembers, even if men do not. Miles was the great-grandson of Aspen Riggs, though he seldom spoke of it. His company had hired him to smooth permits, hire contractors, and open the hollow to paying visitors. On his first day, Miles walked the ridge with a clipboard, noting every hazard, loose stones, soft soil, the collapsed shaft. He spoke with confidence to the crew. "We'll secure the site. Pave and overlook. History sells, folks. People want a scare they can walk away from." That night, in the motel off the highway, he opened a folder from his grandmother's attic. Inside lay a letter dated 1893, the sheriff's hand scrawled and broken. "If her words take root, may God forgive me." The mountain groans, and I hear her in my sleep. Miles closed the folder quickly, as if the ink might still bleed. He told no one of the letter. By October, concrete mixers churned at the ridge. Workers set rebar, framed walkways, poured slabs over soft earth. The hollow did not protest loudly at first, only a hum, like far-off thunder when skies were clear. The men laughed it off, called it old mountain burps. But then the ground shifted. Tools went missing, found days later half buried in mud. Lanterns blew out in still air. One man swore he saw a woman's hand pressed into the clay where he had just poured. Miles grew nervous but pressed on. Deadlines mattered more than folklore. Superstition won't stop progress, he told the crew. Then came the rain. A sudden, violent storm ripped over the Ozarks, thunder without lightning, sheets of water drowning the half-built platforms. In the morning, the concrete slab above the old shaft had cracked clean down the center, a jagged wound exposing black earth beneath. The crew refused to return. Bad ground, they said. Which ground? Miles cursed them, but when he stood alone at the break, the air itself seemed to breathe. From the gap rose a box, warped wood shoved upward by the shifting clay. Miles pulled it free with trembling hands. Inside lay two things, a child's locket, tarnished but intact, and a folded sheet of paper. The paper bore the signature of Sheriff Aspen Riggs. A confession. He admitted the barn fire had not been witchcraft but accident. That Elin Hatchard had saved a child, not cursed one. That he, in fear and pride, had ordered her taken anyway. Asterisk, if this curse lives, the letter ended, it lives not in her but in us. Miles sat in the rain, the locket cold in his palm, his chest tight. He thought of permits, investors, deadlines. He thought of his family name. And he thought of the handprint, the one still pressed into clay below. That night, the hollow answered. As workers packed their trucks, the ground trembled. Not a quake, not thunder, but a steady pulse, as though the earth had found its voice. Walkways cracked, pylons tilted, and in the wash of lightning-less rain, the ridge bled mud and stone. Miles ran, the locket clutched in his hand, until he reached the old cedar stump near the ridge. There, etched into clay fresh with stormwater, lay the unmistakable mark, a hand, fingers spread, palm pressed deep. Breathless, soaked, Miles knelt. He set the locket in the print, his own hand shaking above it. "It wasn't yours to carry," he whispered. "It was ours. All this time." For a heartbeat, the rain softened. The groan beneath the ridge faded into silence. The mud stilled. Miles rose, leaving the locket in the earth, and stepped back. The handprint closed slowly, clay sliding over it until nothing remained but smooth, wet soil. The park was never built. Reports cited unstable geology, unsuitable for tourism. The company walked away. Locals said the hollow had swallowed its own dead again. But those who know the story, who know the name Hatchard, tell it differently. They say the curse never lifted, only listened. That when someone tries to profit from the hollow, it breathes. That the earth still remembers, waiting, patient, bound not by time but by covenant. And if you stand on the ridge today, on a quiet night after heavy rain, some claim you can still hear it. Not thunder, not wind. A whisper, close to your ear, soft as smoke. You broke the covenant. And the earth remembers.